Hi, Mark. So just today, when I was on some dog training sites, I saw a few people post questions about how to handle some issues that they were having with their anxious dogs. Two of the examples that I can come up with off the top of my head are, one, a dog that sort of spontaneously started to focus in on things on the kitchen wall and got really obsessive about it, and the person hasn't figured out how to deal with that, and whether it's a medical issue or what. And secondly, was another dog who was really fearful of fireworks. But in addition to the fireworks, ultimately it came out that the dog is really afraid of lots of noises, really noise sensitive, and so.
And even much smaller noises, not just big noises.
Right. I mean, basically, a walk with the dog is just very difficult because all sorts of things really freak the dog out. So, the most common recommendation given to both of these owners was to exercise the dog, and that exercise would really help with this behavioral issue. So I wanted to get your thoughts on using exercise as a tool to solve a problem, well, either one of these problems really, and what your thoughts are about that.
Sure. So first of all, let's talk about the good things about exercise. First of all, just generally, exercise is good for dogs. Most dogs like to exercise quite a bit. Most dogs, I think you would generally say, are not exercised enough. Most dogs would get more exercise if they could. Good, consistent endurance type exercise has been very well proven to increase endorphins and serotonin in dogs, which both are mood stabilizers and help some. Exercise is a good thing, and it can be something that we can do that's fun with our dogs, and especially if we're playing games, those can be great ways to help teach dogs self-control, teach rules, teach the dogs to come up and down in energy, that they have to calm down to get the game to continue. So there's lots of things you can do there, but some of those are really not directly exercise related to how you're using it. But a couple things. So let's talk about the bad sides. So good side is it can be helpful to dogs. It's generally a good thing for wellness. Dogs like it. But let's talk about the downsides. First of all, most Americans don't get enough exercise. Might be true of most people worldwide. But so if we push them that exercise is a key or the key to solving their behavior problems, for most people, this is going to be at best a short-term solution because they're not going to maintain some level of exercise over the dog's life. Second of all, it quite frankly is not a solution to these problems for the vast majority of dogs. First of all, a lot of the dogs that have these problems are high-energy dogs that are already getting a lot of exercise. It's certainly true that the dog may feel better on the day that he goes to doggy daycare and maybe gets a lot of exercise than on the day that he doesn't. He's a bit easier to manage. But he hasn't learned any specific behavior, and nobody has changed specific behavior. So we have people who can exercise their dog more. We have dogs that can't exercise more. There are dogs that are OCD or in one way or another very reactive to stuff, that they have physical problems that they can't do more exercise. The reality is we need to learn how to be able to change the behavior, and it's not that hard to do. And we can do it in much more direct ways than the exercise ever would. Keep in mind that the idea of getting the dog to exercise more is really a kissing cousin to the idea of giving the dog Prozac or something else, which again can be helpful, but solve very few behavior problems. And they might make it easier to do some training and help it, but they don't directly solve it. So I rather focus directly on how can we help the dog with this. And one example of this that comes to mind is a Malinois that we worked with a while back. And this was literally a world-class bred competition Malinois. In fact, the dog, I believe, was very directly related to a world champion in some competitive sports. In any case, it was sold to a family, very nice family, that lived in a downtown situation, inner city, in a very large city. And the dog presented all kinds of challenges. And the people were fortunate enough to run into a couple of very good trainers that gave them a lot of help, and did some really good things. Did a lot of obedience, taught them to do a lot of enrichment things with the dog and all. But after 2 years of all this, the dog was extremely difficult to live with still. They loved the dog, they enjoyed the dog, but literally every 2 hours they had a significant enrichment activity for the dog, and the dog was getting worse in OCD type behaviors. The dog was getting very pushy when it would come close to time for an enrichment period. You know, when it would get into these more difficult states closer to those periods, they would typically use a place exercise with the dog, which the dog did very well, but the dog would often sit there and whine or be otherwise agitated and all. And then it came out they're about to have a baby. And so they really can't see how this is going to work out, having the baby. And in fact, while I was out of the room, the owner asked you, how on earth was he going to do all these enrichment activities?
Yeah, he was planning on waking up at 4 in the morning to either take her running in the morning or take her out to play ball or to, yeah. It was insane.
Right. And he also realized that it was very possible that by 4 in the morning he maybe had not yet gotten to sleep because the baby was keeping him up, right?
Exactly.
And
my response was, no, I think that what you're going to end up doing is replacing some of these exercise periods with relaxation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah.
Yeah. So what was interesting was, well, a couple things. First of all, they had some fairly unique situations there. They had basically a glass wall at one end of their house that looked out over the parking area or whatever. And their dog had become really obsessive about that whole area of the house. There was a wall out to the other side of that literally cats and squirrels used as a highway.
Yeah, right.
So cats and squirrels would walk along this wall, and she would sit there for hours, you know, waiting for them to come along, and then would, you know, carry on at that. And of course, they would often use some obedience with that, or make her go to place or something. But she also would snap at the dust that she could see floating in the sunlight, and, you know, she snapped at the occasional bug that was in the house and whatnot, and become very obsessive about that. So in any case, at our house, so we took her to our house for a board and train, and it was a significant time. I think it was close to 3 months, and we didn't have really any of the things that they had there as far as those unusual things.
Right, no baby, and no window that showed you the dust coming through the sunlight.
Yeah, and no little, you know, walkway for all the
cats and squirrels
and stuff, and yeah, all that. So we had a very different situation, and we didn't use any obedience with her. She already knew a lot of obedience. We didn't use any of that. What was interesting, when we came back for our second follow-up, which was 3 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks after we brought her back, she was really nice. She was way more relaxed than she had ever been there, and all. And of course, now they have the baby, and she was great with the baby. You know, had normal curiosity about it, no obsession or anything. Had no problem leaving their toys alone and stuff. But what was interesting was, one of the ways that they would allow her to go to the bathroom was out on their back deck. They had a pad, a little box with some fake turf in it that she could go pee on, that she had been trained to since she was a puppy. So at one point in our discussion, they got up and let her out to go to the bathroom, and she went out, and I went on talking and whatnot. And maybe 15-20 minutes went by, and all of a sudden I realized that they hadn't let the dog back in. And I looked over, and she's just laying out on the deck. And I said to him, I said, am I misremembering this or something? I said, I don't remember her ever relaxing out there. And they said, oh, God, no. You know, before, she would have been just driving us crazy to come back in. And they had very good obedience with her when they would open the door. You know, she would sit before she would come back in. But that didn't help her prior to them getting over there. And I said, well, that's really cool. I said, you know, has she been doing that with any regularity? And they said, oh yeah, she does that all the time. She'll go out there and just lay out there for, you know, half an hour, you know. And this was a dog that if she was out there before, she was either barking and carrying on at the cats or squirrels, or she was pacing, or literally jumping straight up and down to get their attention to come back in. And I said, well, that's really cool. I said, how is she when cats and squirrels come by, you know? And they chuckled because they were sitting where they had a better view of her than I did. And they were like, well, there's been a bunch of them who come by, you know, since we let her out there, you know? And she's just laying out there relaxing. And it was not that we took her to our house and punished the hell out of her out of seeing cats or snapping at dust in the air or anything else. It was really that we had taught her how to relax about things, using a number of different techniques. And this not only made her more livable for the humans, the really important thing is it made her much more comfortable about her own life. And the interesting thing was, she used to go to doggy daycare all the time. That was one of the ways they tried to manage her energy level. And she doesn't go to doggy daycare anymore. She hangs out at home, whether they're there or they're not. She's very comfortable in a crate, which, you know, she didn't used to be. She would go in it, but she wasn't comfortable. And so both the parents can leave for work for the day and come back, and she's cool and happy to see him, but not losing her mind.
Well, and you can actually feel it in her when you touch her. She's she's not that kind of kinetic thing that's just ready to pop. Now she can really enjoy touching. She just is generally more comfortable with the world.
Well, it's funny you say that, because that reminds me, I think about 4 or 6 weeks in, we arranged to meet up with them, just, you know, so they could say hi to their dog and whatnot. They would have withdrawal from their dog. And I remember one of the really interesting things was the woman reached down to pet the dog at one point, and she just said, oh my God, she's soft. I've never felt her soft. And, you know, what she was talking about was the lack of muscular tension, you know, that normally the dog was just tense like an iron bar. And that was so cool for them to see that. It gave them great faith that they weren't
throwing money to the wind,
or sending their dog off for nothing, you know, that there really was some of the kind of changes that we had talked about there might be.
Yeah.
But that was a great example. But, you know, that dog had so many of the problems that you were talking about in these videos that come up. And
she was sort of a repository for a bunch of them.
She was. And, you know, the thing is, had she not been in the city, had she been out in the suburbs or somewhere else, had she been in a home where somebody, you know, worked her in IPO and, you know, got her out tracking a couple days a week and doing protection, that's not a full-time job, you know. And I developed a lot of these ideas because I worked with dogs like that, and they were freaking crazy and they were hard to live with and everything. So the idea that, you know, giving them the job, giving them the exercise, going to solve all these problems, actually a lot of dogs makes them worse.
All right, thank you.
Yep.